Thank you. Thank you.
So, Mr. Bass, let me begin with you, and let me begin with something I heard and noted was newsworthy, something I heard Chairman Nichols say. Is there going to be new money for transportation? No. Is this good news or bad news from the TxDOT perspective?
I would say it's not unexpected news.
Right.
And one of the primary jobs and what we're focusing on as the TxDOT staff is being prepared to deliver on the money that the legislature and voters of Texas have already provided.
Right.
So we think kind of job one is to make sure that we deliver on that money effectively and efficiently, and then in this session or subsequent sessions, if the policymakers begin discussing funding, we'll be there to provide
You've got your
information
hands
and
full
feedback.
already.
We
With
are.
the current work you've got to get done.
We look forward to that challenge and delivering on that additional money, yes.
Right. It is, am I correct, it is that the legislature to which you are responsible here, right? So, I mean, I like to think about reporting structure. So, do you answer to the legislature, do you answer to the governor, or do you answer to us?
Yes.
Yes. Any and all, is that what it is?
All 27 million
Right.
of our bosses and customers.
So,
yes.
Commissioner, hearing that there's not going to be new money, I move to ask you what I asked the legislators. Is the money that you currently have available to TxDOT enough to do the business of the people of Texas?
Well, I think James said it right, and that is, James and I both heard Chairman Nichols say that there are not going to be new funding streams considered by the 85th legislative session. However, there are funding streams that we are pursuing, and I'd just like to kind of articulate that
Please.
for a minute. And that is October of 2015, Governor Abbott asked me to go to Washington, and I call it the Expeditionary Force. And I think the idea was if I went to Washington with the idea of trying to eliminate Texas from having the label as the last donor state for our federal highway tax, and if I got shot, then it was probably not a good idea to pursue.
But it was a noble mission nonetheless.
But if I came back, yeah, my family would have received the Purple Heart, and that would have been the answer to the question. But to my, I won't say surprise, but to a person that I talked to, and I had an opportunity to meet with many members of the Texas delegation, both on the Republican and the Democratic side. And first of all, many people in the Texas delegation in Capitol Hill were unaware that Texas is the last donor state. And by the way, just so we put context, that's $800 million a year of additional funding streams. And so I just returned from a follow-up trip, this time with more reinforcements from the governor's office, and we had great reception. I had one-on-ones with 20 of our members of the Texas delegation, both Senator Cornyn and then many members of the Congress. And then I was with Chairman Bill Schuster, who is chairman
from Pennsylvania.
Correct, but he's chairman of the House Transportation Committee.
So the theory here, Commissioner, is that there's money that is available to us potentially through a federal government door that would supplement the money that we're currently getting in Texas.
Yes, sir.
I thought we hated Washington.
Well, here's what Texans hate about what I'm talking about. Texans are paying in 10% of the federal highway gas tax for the entire United States, but we're only getting 95 cents back.
So this is
Texas.
simply let's get our money
This
back.
is all we're asking for is parity.
Right.
We just want parity.
Commissioner Bugg, this is a pressing issue for Texas, this question of whether we have enough money, in large part because of the situation we find ourselves in as a state. 27 million people in Texas today. By 2050, the demographers say we will be at 54 million Texans, double the state's population. As far as I know, there's no plan to expand the borders of the state, right? We've somehow got to get double the number of people in 2050 around the state, point to point. And so just the crush of demography becomes a challenge. It's just hard for me to imagine how there's ever enough money to take that on.
Well, you're spot on, Evan, and that is that about the week that I was appointed by Governor Abbott in February of 2015, the State Demographer's Office came out, and as you correctly state, 27.7 million Texans in 2015, and we're going to welcome some 26 additional million Texans by 2050. And we're projecting for our population to go to 54 million, as you state. What we did, that was a big data point to me as soon as I was appointed, because it dawned on me that if that much population increase is going to occur over the next 35 years, and we have to take the state demographer's work seriously, then I asked the TxDOT map-making division to basically work with the state demographer's office and create what we call a heat map. And the question was, where are all those additional Texans going to end up?
Right. It's not only about the size of the population, but where they're distributed.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Because you have to drill down and figure out where are those folks going to end up going, because that's going to drive a lot of the policy making.
Decision making at TxDOT. And you, Mr. Bass, have the benefit of 30 plus years, as I said, of having been at the agency. You go back to a time when Texas had, what, 14 million, 13 million people. Is the work of the person in your job and of the work of the agency different under these circumstances simply by virtue of the numbers?
I believe it is, and our role has changed over that time too. When back in 1985 we were the Department of Highways and Public Transportation.
Right.
Now we are a Department of Transportation with various, roles and responsibilities in various modes.
Highway's really only one component.
One component, a very large component, and kind of still the driving force what we do, directed by the funding that we receive.
Right.
Because the vast, vast majority, I think it's 97% of the state funding that we received may only be spent on highways. And so we have roles and responsibilities in other...
Has it always been the case that the vast majority, almost 100%, has been on highways?
Yes.
Doesn't that seem crazy now, when you consider the fact that the population is growing and there are so many more options available, and maybe we need even more than we have on transportation, just to dedicate the time and energy of TxDOT to highways?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, we talked about the population doubling in the next 25 years or so, is what is that society going to look like at that point? Because one of the challenges in planning is we always want to project today out into the future. And was it 8 years ago, we weren't carrying around smartphones or tablets yet. Probably 90% of the room has them now. And so looking, how is technology going to alter the way that people move and how we move freight within and out of our state over that same time frame? And then we, working with our local partners, how do we plan for that uncertainty, but not just continue to think in today's world as we look to the future?
Well, it also seems to me, Mr. Bass, that you want to be proactive as opposed to reactive, right? You're not in a defensive crouch the whole time waiting to see how the world affects you. You want to try to get out ahead of some of the things that may come.
Yeah, and so we have partnerships with a lot of the state universities, the Texas A&M Transportation Institute here in College Station, Center for Transportation Research in Austin, and others across the state. We have a State Transportation Innovation Council where we have invited locals, Department of Public Safety, DMV, transit entities, really anyone who has a role in transportation, to try and start looking at the current technologies that, generally speaking, we're all aware of, but then also try and look at what is just being investigated now that's 4 to 5 years away, and how might that alter the way we deliver our service together.
And you have the latitude, Mr. Bass, to do that. You're not just taking your marching orders from the legislature at the detail level. I mean, there's obviously things that are happening, laws passed and dollars allocated, so that you are taking direction, but you have the latitude to do some of this work.
Correct.
Spade work, you might think of it, at the ground level.
Right, doing the planning and looking at those
Right.
future opportunities or future challenges as well, potentially.
An example, Commissioner Bug, would be that you all got guidance or support or encouragement to tackle this congestion issue.
Yes, sir.
And you, as one of 5 commissioners, but I gather you maybe a little bit more than the other 5, have really stepped up and made this a priority. You got money allocated and you got direction at the top level, but in terms of the detail level decisions made about how much money goes to which community and how we're going to tackle this, that's something that was decided more at the TxDOT and the commission level, right?
Right.
Could you talk about that project?
Yes, sir. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you really kind of go back to the population discussion that we just had a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
And then when those heat maps came back, and we talk about congestion today, just think what congestion would be like down the road if we don't tackle it today. And so in September of 2015, Governor Abbott called on the Texas Transportation Commission to basically formulate and develop a statewide strategic plan that would focus on the worst choke points and congestion relief statewide. I was asked to lead that effort by the commission. So I have
those are
been
necessarily in and around the big cities, right?
Right, and so what we've been doing, of course, congestion is in the, everyone has their own definition of what congestion is. I talk about, we have a small ranch in Bandera, Texas, and if the traffic is backed up at the four-way stop in front of Busby's Barbecue, then everybody's
That's
saying,
congestion.
That's congestion. So what we decided to do was, not only have we developed a statewide strategic plan, but within the congestion relief initiative that the governor called on the commission to do, we have really focused on the 5 major metropolitan areas, and those are Austin, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Dallas, and Houston. The reason why we focused on those 5 is that that's home to 2/3 of Texans right now. And as we talked about before, that's where the population growth is going.
Yep.
Those are the only cities today that have populations of over 1 million people. That's where 97 of the top 100 choke points, as decided by TTI here on the campus at Texas A&M, that's the home to 97 of the worst choke points in the entire state. So it's a metrics driven, that's what I wanted Representative Simmons to hear. This whole Clear Lanes project is a metrics driven process where we've got to go where the population is today and where the population will go tomorrow.
Yep.
So how we really tackled that is the commission this year in February allocated 2 years of the ending diversions, $650 million a year, thanks to the Texas legislature of ending the diversions. So the commission,
it's $1.3 billion.
It's $1.3 billion. What we did was we immediately focused by bringing in the district engineers of those 5 major metropolitan areas, and I created a task force. We have monthly task force meetings. It's kind of like you mentioned that I'm chairman of a bank board, and these monthly meetings are just like a bank board meeting. We bring James and all the top 25 TxDOT executives into the room, and we bring in the district engineers. We work on a monthly basis on projects that are specifically in those 5 major metropolitan areas. How are they doing on a timeline? What's the letting date? What's the completion date?
And they come to you, Commissioner, with a list of projects they want to pursue or are pursuing?
Well, those projects...
I'm thinking about the SWIFT program that came out of the water discussion at the legislature, where you have, whatever it is, 16 water districts around the state, and they were basically all in the course of this process feeding potential work upstream, and then they had to be approved or not approved. Is this essentially a ground-up process as well?
It's absolutely a ground-up, and what I did right off the bat was I started what I call a listening tour, and I went to each of those 5 communities.
Yeah.
And we got out of Austin, we went to the communities that we serve, and we had a technical advisory committee meeting in the morning, and the district engineer had been working with the local MPOs and all the transportation planners in that respective area.
Right.
And they're the ones that developed what they felt like were the key projects. Then what we did was, as a component part of that, is we had a meeting with the centers of influence, the elected officials, the mayors, the county judges, the state representatives, state senators, U.S. congressmen and state U.S. senators. And we had them in the room, and as it related to a specific area, these are the projects that are being recommended. What do you think? We were standing back. I was standing back. I felt like it was very important that it was a local decision of what are the worst choke points, what are the biggest projects, what are the most important projects. Out of that came $2.5 billion of projects that were funded with that 1.3, because what we found was there were a lot of projects that were just mothballed because they were short of funds and have been sitting there for years. So we pulled a lot of projects off the shelf, deployed that capital very quickly, and when you see all the work area ahead orange signs as you go to these 5 cities, that's it.
So so take me out to the end of this project. When will this be done? Or will it ever be done?
Well, I think the reason why we named it Texas Clear Lanes is it's clearly aspirational in its design. But we want the taxpayers of the state of Texas to know that what we've done is now we're programming these new dollars that the Texas legislature in the 84th. So Proposition 1, Proposition 7, ending diversions, all of that, those funding streams are coming in. And we believe that the vote of 80% for Proposition 1, 83% for Proposition 7 gave the TxDOT Commission a mandate. And so we are answering that mandate with this new congestion relief initiative.
And the $1.3 billion, Commissioner, will be enough?
No. So what we're doing is, August of this year, just several months ago, the Commission took the historic action and we adopted a $70 billion unified transportation plan. That's a 10-year plan, Evan, and so what we did was part of that. I want to make sure that everyone in the room understands, and Senator Nichols touched on this, but out of the $70 billion, we first allocated $24.2 billion for maintenance of our state highway system, safety, bridges. That is job one, because you've got to take care of the assets you have. So here in the Bryan College Station area, that money will be allocated statewide.
Yeah.
Then what we did was we also increased from just $400 million for rural connectivity dollars, we increased that to $6.6 billion. So rural connectivity will continue to be funded. What that left us with was 28.9, call it $29 billion that is funded for this congestion relief initiative.
Right.
And so we're deploying
so
those.
The 1.3 is just a
that was a down payment.
Starter.
Yes, sir.
Starter.
That was a down payment.
Right.
And so we're programming those dollars. And again, I just completed a listening tour, again, going to those 5 major metropolitan areas. Now they're seeing the proof of how we're deploying the capital.
Right.
And we're trying to earn the trust of the taxpayers and the legislature
Right.
every day by executing on this. And it's all about execution on those funding streams.
Well, Mr. Best, Mr. Bugg, Commissioner Bugg gets at a good point. There is naturally suspicion or concern in the public about what it is that TxDOT does and why doesn't TxDOT do what I want them to do, and what's the deal there? Is that just general distrust and mistrust of institutions, or has TxDOT earned the suspicion of people in the state of Texas?
No, I think it's a complicated process. The project development and planning process, which is surprising to, neighbors, friends, even family members, takes 8 to 10 years, and so people don't know that planning's going on.
Yeah, the immediate gratification world we live in is not really good with that, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so with all of the, and these are all good things, they just take time. The public involvement process, the environmental process, the planning, the designing, taking that input, seeing what priorities are important, take time. It is a process. Oftentimes, people all know where the congestion is and why isn't somebody doing something on this.
Right.
It may already be 3 years into the planning or the development phase, but there's no, there's not a caterpillar out on the roadway, moving dirt around, so nobody's doing anything.
Right.
Well, no, there's a lot going on. The other thing is setting the priorities within these large metropolitan areas. A lot of people don't understand the role of the metropolitan planning organizations that are there at the local level. And some of the funding within this 10-year plan is allocated to the MPOs for them to select priority projects, they as a group. And then even if there's a project that's picked by TxDOT or the commission, TxDOT staff will pick maintenance projects primarily. But if there are broader projects that we pick, it must be adopted within the plan of the MPO. So there's a lot of coordination. And again, these are all good things. The process takes time. A lot of it is not visible as you commute back and forth to work every day, and people wonder, why isn't something happening?
I think there's a misunderstanding maybe that TxDOT has more power to execute than it actually does, when transportation as a policy matter is fundamentally local in origin, right? A lot of these decisions that we assume TxDOT is making or not making actually are decisions made at the local level.
Correct, and a lot of them are joint decisions. Some may be there, but also joint, and there are 25 metropolitan planning organizations across the state. Not every area of the state is covered by a metropolitan planning organization, but in those areas that aren't covered by it, our district engineer, our local leader for the TxDOT team is meeting with those locally elected officials and going through that same planning process.
So let me slightly shift back to the conversation I engaged Commissioner Bugg in about whether the resources available to this policy vertical, transportation, are adequate. We have seen, not only in transportation, but I think especially in transportation over the last couple of years, the pervasiveness of public-private partnerships come into the conversation, these P3 deals, which is often couched as a response to we don't have adequate resources on the public end, and so we've got to partner with the private sector to get a lot of our aspirations realized. That continues to be a big part of the mix, does it not?
Well, I think that's a question to be seen on these public-private partnerships. In order for TxDOT to pursue one of those, it must be included in a statutory list, approved, obviously, and adopted by the legislature. In last session, no projects were added to that. We'll see if the legislature decides
Who submits the list to the legislature for approval?
Again, mostly it comes from the local delegations.
It's again local. It's local.
Yeah, the members of the legislature meeting with their elected officials, meeting with their metropolitan planning organizations, knowing what happened is the metropolitan planning organization in the past, having received their allocation of funding from this 10-year planning document and allocating it out by projects, they'd say, but we still have all these very important projects left and we don't have money to fund them. Are there other methods to try and advance those? And then over the past decade or so, one of those options had been the public-private partnerships. The MPOs and others would take that to their local delegation, who would then bring it to Austin during the legislature for debate as to whether or not to get it added to that list.
Mr. Bugg, if the issue, as Commissioner Nichols, or Chairman Nichols, pardon me, says we're not going to have new transportation money, theoretically, if money is not an agenda item for TxDOT or for the Commission, going back to the legislature, theoretically there are other things that you would like to see the legislature approve, enact, laws passed, policies put into place that would be beneficial to your ability to do what you do. So you're heading into a session. Again, as I said to Representative Israel, this is wish list time. As you contemplate what you'd like to see transportation committees in the House and Senate approve and the governor sign, what's on your list? What would you like to see done?
I don't really have, honestly, a specific ask from the
oh, they must love you then.
From Chairman Nichols on Senate Transportation Committee, because he correctly pointed out that the funding streams that were programmed through Proposition 1, Proposition 7,
that's already
happened. All that, that's happened, but there are abilities for the legislature to come back and tweak that. And what I guess my only ask is, I am not asking as a commissioner, as one of 5 commissioners, as you point out, I'm not in any way asking for more funding out of the 85th. I understand it's going to be a tough legislative
But are there
session.
any policy changes that you would want to see in lieu of asking for additional funding?
Well, number one is just please keep the funding streams the way that they have been voted in place, because again, we're trying to earn our trust with the legislature and the voters of the state of Texas by executing on deploying those funding streams in the best way possible. In terms of policy, you know, you talk about funding, and Chairman Nichols is absolutely right, and I've looked at his charts, and you know, Texas was a pay-as-you-go state for many, many years, and then it got chipped away. And one of the things that I think most people don't understand is that the maintenance dollars that we're trying to allocate, when I mentioned 24.2 earlier, and I mentioned that we passed a $70 billion UTP, that UTP has doubled from what it used to be. So it used to be about 35. And so if 25 is on maintenance and then 10's left for everything else, you don't have enough to really tackle anything. So we're going to take the funding streams, we're going to continue to earn the trust every day. We're not asking for more funding streams. And honestly, other than that, I don't have anything.
You have no other issues. Mr. Bass, do you have anything that you'd like the legislature to do differently? Again, consequence-free. Consequence-free.
As a state employee, of course not. I will say that
I think you're going to get a good year-end evaluation.
In August, at the same time as when the commission adopted this 10-year plan of $70 billion, which the previous plan just 12, 18 months before had been 32, they also adopted our appropriation request for 2018 and 19. And included in that was a request for additional FTEs for TxDOT. Again, we want to deliver efficiently and effectively on the funding. And I think what is, many people may not know, but as commissions over time, I think quite appropriately, they had looked at this 10-year plan and they saw the ending of the different borrowing programs the legislature had authorized. That 10-year program had a drop in workload. And so since 2008, 2010, the commission had turned back in 2,000 FTE slots at TxDOT. We basically went from 14,000 down to 12,000.
Statewide.
Statewide.
Right.
But now, thanks to leadership, legislature, voters, that work program and workload is coming back up. And so in looking at it, in order to ensure that, like we've been focused on the Clear Lanes projects, that we're managing that portfolio of projects and getting them developed and ready so people can start seeing dirt turning, we included as part of that appropriations request a request for additional FTEs of around just over 600. If we don't get those, we're still going to work day and night to deliver on that
But
on
it's
that
going
project.
to be harder if you're a little undermanned.
Correct. And we're continuing to look internally out of the 11,900 we have today, making sure that we have those aligned. Believe it or not, that's a limited resource.
Is this a legislature?
Make sure it's aligned properly.
Is the disposition of this particular composition of the legislature such that you think they're eager to add a whole bunch of new employees to a state agency?
No, I think it's challenging. Also, in the environment, every state agency received a instruction letter in developing that appropriation request to, hey,
take a haircut.
Yeah, please take a 4% haircut for general revenue related funds. And so we know this request and thought is somewhat swimming upstream, if you will. But again, looking at what's happening in transportation and the funding that's been provided and our goal of wanting to deliver on it effectively, fortunately as staff, Commission was supportive that we, of asking for additional, but again, we're continuing to look internally to see if we can reallocate amongst the resources we already have
efficiency
to lessen
as
that
a goal. So you were sitting here when Chairman Nichols answered my question, what is on your agenda list for next session? And the first thing he brought up was some version of the toll conversation. Where is TxDOT's place in this discussion about tolls? Where should it be? Where should we as a state be headed, understanding that there are people on both sides of this who feel passionately about it? No, I'm looking at you. No.
Well, our role is the
you
one that's given to us by the Commission and the legislature. But in conversations I've had over this, I think at times people are surprised that tolling has been part of the transportation answer in Texas for 60 years. The Dallas-Fort Worth Turnpike, in the late 50s was opened up, and famously people refer to, well, when that debt was paid off in the early to mid 70s, the tolls were removed, and we all know it as Interstate 30 today. Well, then in the early 60s, the Dallas North Tollway, which I would say is the oldest, most mature tolling system, now managed and operated by NTTA, was taken on, and that's really been the horsepower locally for them to deliver the network that's out there. But again, it'll sound like a broken record, it's a local decision by state law. If there is a toll road to be developed within the boundary of a local toll entity, NTTA being an example, North Texas Tollway Authority, Dallas-Fort Worth, Harris County Toll Road Authority, some of the regional mobility authorities, they have first option to deliver that.
You can't cause it to happen, and you can't prevent it from happening.
And then they have to work with the MPO in that area, Metropolitan Planning Organization, to get that project adopted and put into their plan overall. So it's really a local decision, locally driven. At times in the past, they've come to the commission and the department and asked for assistance, whether planning, professional expertise, or in some cases for funding. And on those funding ones, that then becomes a decision.
But you understand, Mr. Bass, whether or not this is a local decision, people blame you guys. If people are mad about toll roads, it's TxDOT's fault.
Well, and oftentimes when people drive on city streets and county roads, they think TxDOT.
Yeah, Commissioner, are you sympathetic to the general objection to this, that we're being double taxed as citizens? First, we pay tax dollars that go into the funding of transportation policy initiatives generally, and then that we have to then pay a second time to drive on a road that we thought we were paying for the first time. Do you understand? I mean, it's a very facile and in some ways inaccurate articulation of the toll road situation, but for the majority of people who don't have a sophisticated understanding of how this works, they think they're just being double taxed. Right?
Well, let's take a concrete example to really try to get to the policy issue.
Yeah.
And James did a great job of articulating how the department works.
Right,
but
which I'll sum up as it's the fault of the cities.
but
Those are my words, not yours. I get it.
Right.
No, I'm good.
But to your question,
Yeah.
you know, when people talk about, and one thing I try to do is listen. I think listening is a lost art. And what I try to do is I listen to the anti-toll faction, and I try to listen to the folks that are not for tolls as much as they're for solutions. And they look at tolling as a tool in the toolbox, was a phrase that's been used a lot about tolling.
Right.
On this question of double taxation, concrete example, San Antonio was mentioned earlier. Chairman Nichols mentioned that San Antonio just advanced 281 and took the tolls off. A big segment, those of you that are familiar with San Antonio know the bottleneck that occurs when you pass 1604 and try to go all the way to the county line, one of the fastest growing segments of San Antonio. It's been a debate society in San Antonio for 16 years
right, yeah.
before I became commissioner. One of the things I wanted to get done was that. And so the solution was we removed the tolls as a commission, took the historic action of actually removing tolls off a project that had been basically approved by a former commission for a toll road. Well, there were funds available that could have been reallocated, and the local decision was that's what we really want, so that we're not getting into this double taxation issue. And so that will be a freeway, if you will. It will not be a toll project. But on the other hand, you have also an example in southwest Austin that the commission just recently took, again, the action to approve a toll project. And so I think what we're trying to do as a commission is we're trying to advance, you know, Governor Abbott said in his State of the State that he wanted to increase transportation funding streams without raising taxes, tolls, fees, and debt. We all get that, and the 84th legislative session, and the voters, as I said, the Texas mandate by 80%, 83 on Prop 17, they've spoken too. Those dollars are all programmed for non-toll
but that's
projects.
but that's net. That's a net effect. So you're going to gain some toll projects, you're going to lose some toll projects, and the net effect will be that you're not going to see that the burden on Texans go up.
Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take those funding streams that are dedicated for non-toll purposes, and we're going to, as I said, that's Texas Clear Lanes. Texas Clear Lanes is 100% non-tolled. Free. And that's what I'm spending a lot of my time focused on, working on around the state. But hear what I'm saying, and that is that we as a commission will consider, as we did when the folks in southwest Austin came and asked the commission to approve the tolling because they believe that was the only way to advance that transportation solution in their community. So I think this commission will consider a tolling option if the local community comes to the commission, even in the context of us trying to take these funding streams that are clearly dedicated for non-toll projects.
Okay. Well, excellent and helpful. We'll go to questions from all of you. If you have a question for Commissioner Bugg or for Director Bass, please put your hand up and we'll walk a microphone around to you. Question? No hand. You have an opportunity to talk back to TxDOT and you're declining to do it. Question back there. Sir.
Yes. Howdy. Oh, howdy. First of all, I just want to welcome y'all to Texas A&M. Thanks for coming out. We really appreciate it. And I just got a question about, y'all touched on the community relationships and partnerships with TxDOT and how oftentimes communities have to work together with TxDOT in that intersection. Could you just explain a little bit more how that works? For example, here in College Station, we have University Drive, which is actually owned by the state of Texas. And so if there's a proposition or a need by the community to make a change on the road, what does that process kind of look like between the state and the community? Could you maybe elaborate on that?
Mr.
Yeah,
Bex?
one of the main times,
Thank
so what's happened over decades, and we see it in Austin, we see it here in College Station, roads that in the past were connections between the major cities got replaced by the interstate system, but they never got taken off the state highway system. And so we've then seen those different areas continue to grow, and most famously, the one in the state that everybody refers to is Westheimer in Houston. It's actually a farm-to-market road. And so it's on the state highway system. And so when communities want to make changes to that, and one of the big things is what we call access management. And as a non-engineer, what I think about on that is driveways. How many driveways can you have on that road going into businesses and out of businesses, and how far do they have to be spaced apart to ensure safe movement? And it's an issue like that where the city or the local community may want to make that change. They will visit with our local district office. They will go out and look at the road, do a survey, and see what is allowed and acceptable, again, focusing on a safety standpoint.
So for this questioner, the proper route to go down if you want to get some change done to University Drive is start with the local district office here.
Correct.
Right? That's the first question. Okay. I saw another hand up. Maybe on this side? Right there? Yes. Yes, sir.
Wondering what is how TxDOT could promote down in the local level cities greater emphasis on improving efficiency, by which one of the ideas mentioned here, coordinating traffic lights, and getting rid of potholes, so you've got greater throughput. A lot of these are local issues, but what could TxDOT be doing to help local communities?
Excellent. Do you have a role? Does TxDOT, does the commission have a role in alleviating some of these problems at the local level, or is that just outside your purview?
So oftentimes the larger cities, the traffic lights within those cities, even if they're on the frontage roads of our system, are managed and controlled by that municipality.
Yeah, right.
And there's funding, but that's the way it currently works. If there's a shift in a policy change or something, I would leave that to the policymakers, but that responsibility, for the most part, is managed at the local level.
Do you get into, if you're not actually allowed to, or not chartered to deal with those issues because they were local issues, are you in a position to be advocates on behalf of policy changes, either downstream or upstream? Could you be working to advocate with municipalities for changes of the sort being described, or upstream, as we talked about in the last panel, could TxDOT be, I mean, I know you're very concerned with safety. We talked about the 17 years, 16 years as of the 7th of November with no fatalities.
So I think
could you be advocating for the texting while driving ban? Can you be advocates upstream?
we wouldn't. The texting while driving ban would be a legislative issue, so we wouldn't advocate for or against.
You wouldn't take a position.
Correct, but on the
TxDOT doesn't want to take a position against distracted driving, really?
if there is a legislation and there's current laws on the book about distracted driving, we will comment and say, don't text and drive, it's unsafe. Whether or not the state of Texas needs to adopt a law to get that message across is not a role of a state agency to take. We will promote that the safest thing to do is not to text and drive.
But promoting that is different from legislative advocacy.
Correct. Right. We will promote that from a safety standpoint. To coordinate amongst, like on traffic signals, I mentioned earlier our state Transportation Innovation Council. We also have a Texas Technology Transportation Task Force. What is happening, not only across the state but across the country, is technology, automated vehicles, connected vehicles, whether in the infrastructure that they drive on, the integration of technology is happening at a somewhat rapid pace. What we want to do as TxDOT is bring all of the players together, whether it's Del Rio and Dallas and Dalhart. We don't need 3 different groups focusing on the same issue. We want to share that research, the best practices, the lessons learned, and if TxDOT can be the conduit for all transportation providers, and again, all transportation providers, not just state, local, but transit and other
Yeah.
forms. For that discussion and that sharing to happen, that's a role we're moving on, trying to raise that level of coordination.
Okay. Other hands. Got right here in the front, Jess. Sir.
You talked earlier about congestion management.
Yes.
And you highlighted the 5 major metropolitan areas. And I understand, like the gentleman asked over here, about working with the local district. But in terms of getting funding for areas outside of those 5,
Right.
the Brazos Valley, has congestion issues, has state highway congestion issues.
Right.
How do we secure the funding needed for one of the non-5
Yeah.
metropolitan areas to make improvements here?
Yeah, it's a great question because, as you know, Commissioner, while the 5 big cities are the 5 places with the most choke points, I mean, you've been down to the Rio Grande Valley. If you drive from McAllen over to Brownsville through Weslaco, that highway will occasionally get what we understand up here to be congested, right? There are congestion points in the Panhandle. There are congestion points out around El Paso. So do they just not benefit from this effort?
No, not at all. And I'm thank you for the question because it gives me an opportunity to really address it square head on. And the answer is that what we have done is we have taken $5 billion in what we call connectivity congestion, Category 4 funding, and we took that money and we allocated it statewide by the MPOs. There were 2 districts, 2 TxDOT districts that did not have an MPO, and that is Lufkin and Childress. And we're working on basically getting a fair share for those. But I want to make clear that what we are doing is, with a lot of this funding, is we have formula allocated to that statewide because, as I said earlier, there's a lot of congestion outside of the 5 major metropolitan areas. We get that, and we address that. And so when we passed the UTP in August, we actually, pardon me, formula funded that so that everyone would get a part of that congestion relief money.
It's just a point that the 5 big cities are the principal focus of this initiative.
Absolutely. And so when I articulated earlier what Texas Clear Lanes is about, and it is a very focused program of the 5 major metropolitan areas, and that's because, as I said, 2/3 of the Texas population live in those 5 major metropolitan areas. I said Texas Clear Lanes is a special program within the statewide congestion relief initiative. That's why I appreciate your question, to be able to come back and say we are focusing on more on congestion relief initiative, which is what the governor called on us to do, but we are focused on where most of the choke points are, which are the 97 out of the top 100. El Paso, by the way, and RGV are the 2 other areas that are getting a lot of funding because of the population. But we have taken a statewide approach on congestion relief initiative broadly.
Yeah, good. I see it's 10:15. We are at the conclusion of this panel. So great to have an opportunity to visit with Director Bass and Commissioner Bugg. Please give them a big hand.
Thank you all.